Hi, it's Phil here from Revive My Ride, and if your windshield wipers have stopped working, by checking these three things, 99% of the time you'll get them going again. So the three things are checking the windscreen wiper fuse, checking that you're getting power to the wiper motor, and finally checking that the wiper mechanism and the motor itself are free and that they move easily. Okay, so let's get straight to it. So the first thing you need to do is find your fuse box, and I'll give you a few examples. So on this Mercedes, the fuse box is under the bonnet and you'll just find it under this cover here. And on a BMW you can find the fuse box behind the glove box. And finally on this Porsche Boxster, down in the driver's footwell behind a cover, that's where you find the fuse box. So you might find it easier just to Google search up where the fuse box is on your car. Now go ahead and open the fuse box cover, and most cars will have a fuse diagram inside. It's like a little leaflet. So for this Boxster, the leaflet's telling me that it's row C, number 6 for the windscreen wipers fuse.
Row A, row B, row C. Number 6 is that one there, that 25 amp fuse.
Once you've identified the fuse, you can go ahead and pull it with some needle nose pliers and then inspect it to see if it's blown. So you should be able to tell just visually if you've got a blown fuse or not. So these are all good fuses, and what I'm showing you here is that there's a few different types. But the key thing is, in each of these types of fuse, this bit in the middle would burn away, and sometimes actually it goes a little bit black as well. So you'll definitely know if you have a burned out fuse or not. This is an example of a blown fuse, and as you can see, the element is gone from the middle. Go ahead and replace the fuse with the same size as what came out, and go test your windscreen wipers. The majority of the time this will get you going again, but if your windshield wipers still don't work or the fuse blows again, you'll have to move to the next stage, so I recommend you keep watching. If changing the fuse didn't get you going again, it's time to move to the next step, where we check if power is getting to the wiper motor. And to do this we'll need to remove the wiper arms. So just note that sometimes you access the wiper arm nuts when the bonnet's up, and sometimes when it's down. It depends on which model. And the nuts will almost always have some kind of a weather cover on them. This is an example on a BMW. So go ahead and lever the nut cover off so that then you can get to the nut underneath. And you just fully undo the nut that's holding the wiper arm on, and then you gently wiggle the arm back and forth and lift at the same time, and usually it'll come off with a little bit of perseverance. Just do that on both sides, the driver and the passenger wiper arms. Now we need to remove the wiper mechanism cover, and most cars will have a series of screws that hold this in place. So for example, with this BMW you've got screws across the front here, so there's some on the left and a couple in the middle and then another one on the right hand side, and then after that it just snaps into place. But on this Porsche Boxster, for example, it's got similar screws, but then it's also got these additional nuts on either side of the windscreen which you have to undo. Usually with a little bit of looking at it, you'll see where the retaining screws and nuts are. And once you've removed the cover, you should be able to see the wiper mechanism and motor underneath. Now that we have the access that we need, we can unplug the electrical connection from the motor, and this will allow us to test if it's getting power to it. And in order to do the testing, we need to turn the ignition to the ignition 2 position, and then turn the wipers onto the continuous position. This would normally send power to the wiper motor, so that electrical connection we just unplugged should have a live feed going to it. So now turn your electrical meter to read DC voltage, and you do the testing as follows. The first thing is you hold the black negative lead against any bare metal area on your car, whether that's the engine block or here it's on the suspension mount. And then you touch the positive red lead against each one of the terminals in the plug in turn, and keep an eye on the meter and you should see a voltage appear on it. If you do, then it means you're getting power to the wiper motor, but since it's still not working, then it's likely that there's a problem with the motor or the mechanism itself. If you still don't have any voltage at this point, then double check again using a different earth point. If you still have no luck, it's quite rare, but you might have a broken wire between the fuse and the wiper motor, and you might need an auto electrician to help you out here. In order to check that the wiper mechanism and the motor itself are free, we need to remove it from the car and get it on the workbench. Normally there'll be 3 or 4 bolts holding the mechanism in, and they'll be pretty easy to spot. So on this Boxster there's one in the middle here, another one in the corner near the windscreen, and then a third bolt just in the middle here. Once you've removed those bolts, you should be able to just lift out the wiper mechanism and the motor as a unit and take it to the workbench. Okay, so as you can see, there's quite a lot of different pivot points. So, you know, there's one in the middle here, and there's a couple more on the outside, and then these are the parts that the actual wipers themselves go onto. This is actually a shaft that runs from the back through this cast aluminium part and then through this linkage arm here, and these can get really tight. So I suppose what we need to learn is the mechanism really tight and it's overheating the motor, in which case we can do something with the mechanism, or actually is the motor starting to fail, in which case the problems with the electrical motor itself. So we can't just grab hold of this and move it around because it's all locked, and that's because the electric motor itself actually drives a little worm gear, and because it's geared it won't allow you just to move it manually. It relies on the motor turning. So if I tried to move this linkage now, in order to move it would have to put the force through the worm gear here and make the motor turn, and that's just not going to happen. So I'll show you that in a little bit more detail. So there's just these little clips that hold this cover on, and you can just pry them up with your fingers usually. So obviously the shaft of the motor runs through the middle, and then this is what I call the worm gear here. So it's like a spiral that's on the end of the shaft of the motor, and it drives little teeth on this nylon disc that you can see here, you see. So it's almost like a power transfer really. And worm gears, they're not really designed for you to be able to move something manually to make that spin. So in order to test the motor and the mechanism separately, we're going to have to detach the motor from the mechanism. Before you remove the nut, it's a good idea to mark up the linkage so that you can put it back into the same position later. With that done, go ahead and remove the nut, and then the linkage should just lever off really easily. With the motor disconnected from the mechanism, you can now get hold of the mechanism and move it around and make a judgment call on how tight it's feeling. It should move really easily, and if it's stiff at all, this will actually overload the motor, which means the motor will be at risk of burning out, but it can also be the cause of the fuse blowing repeatedly. This is a really common cause of car wipers not working. So if the mechanism is really tight, you can actually just strip down each one of those pivot points we just mentioned, clean them up and re-grease them again, and sometimes that can solve your problem. If you turn the mechanism over, on the back side of the shaft that holds the wiper arms on, there's often a circlip that holds it in place. If you undo the circlips for both of the wiper arm shafts and then remove any washers that were underneath, then you should be able to get hold of the mechanism and slide the shafts out. A lot of the other joints are just a ball and socket type, so if you use a couple of levers you can just gently split those without damaging it. Once you've split all the various different types of joints, you can just go ahead and clean them up with a cloth. And then here I'm using some white lithium grease to re-grease them again. I'm using this type of grease because it's rubber friendly and it won't degrade the rubber. Now you can go ahead and reassemble the joints again just using a pair of grips and gently squeezing it back together. For any joints where there isn't any rubber present, you can use WD-40 as a cleaning agent and then just use a normal general purpose grease during the reassembly. So now it's just a case of cleaning up all the joints, re-greasing them appropriately, reassembling it and making sure all the fasteners are back in place that holds it together. So as I mentioned, the second potential cause is if we have a burned out motor. And you can actually just disassemble these quite easily, but not with it attached to this frame. So these three bolts here are just what holds the motor in place. So we can undo those. And this time I'm just going to use a 10mm socket for those. Must say everything's been very cooperative and no seized bolts or anything like that, so that's nice for a change. Okay, so with those three undone, oh yeah, there you see, the motor just comes off. So the final thing that I recommend that you do before you put the wiper mechanism back again is to have a look at the motor, and believe it or not, you can just have a look at it visually without doing any electrical checks, because if it's burnt out you can usually tell. And there's just these couple of screws here which hold the motor together, so I can undo those two and then we can just slide that off and we can have a look. Now this one here is obscured by this little electrical part, and as we saw a minute ago, this part just unclips. Okay, so I'll just put that off to one side. This time these are just little Torx screws, so I just have a Torx fitting that goes on the end of my quarter drive socket set. I'm just going to pop that on there. Okay, that's one of them, and we know there's another one on the other side. And now what you'll find is this will just slide off. But the magnets are quite strong that's inside this housing, so they're trying to grab. So you do have to pull quite firmly. There we go. So I can actually smell burning now that I've got that off. So if you've got a big nose like me, you can just do a sniff test. Oh, okay, so that's not great. These two things are just the nuts that the screws were in that were holding the housing on. So I won't go into it in lots of detail because this video is not about how electric motors work. All I needed to know is, has my motor failed, in which case I need to replace it to get my wipers going again, or has the mechanism failed, in which case I need to free that off or do something with that, otherwise I'm going to keep losing motors, you know. And for this situation I was showing you, the mechanism seemed fine, although of course I did the work to clean it and grease it. But you can see from this picture that the motor's clearly burned out. Bear in mind that if the mechanism had been really stiff, then also it can cause the motor to overheat and burn out. So it just depends on what your situation is. Hopefully this video helped you, and if it did, then please consider giving me a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe and click the bell to make sure you get to see my next video. And finally, if you want to see more videos just like this one, then why not check out the recommended videos on the right. Okay, thanks for watching, catch you next time.